Well, on the weekend, Foreign Minister Kevin Rudd warned that the Labor Party risks fading away unless it rethinks its strategy.
Mr Rudd's comments come in the lead-up to the ALP National Party conference in Sydney later this week.
Unless we undertake some serious organisational surgery, we end up being a third party in Australian politics.
So for more on that, Lachlan Harris is a former media advisor to Kevin Rudd, and he joins us now in the studio. Lachlan, good morning.
Thanks for having me on.
Kevin Rudd also spoke about giving more power to the rank and file to directly elect senior officials in the party. But I guess all the political analysts want to know what really is Kevin Rudd up to here?
Yeah, look, I think the reality is Labor has some very, very, very big structural problems, and New South Wales, they've become incredibly clear, and the debate is a bit further on in New South Wales. I think Sam Dastyari is the State Secretary there. He's been making some pretty significant positive moves forward in terms of structural reform, and I think all you're seeing is that the federal debate is catching up, is kind of being brought to the bubble by the conference. The reality is, without structural reform, Labor is in real trouble. There's no doubt about that in my mind. And the big issues at the conference are not, although they are very important, they're not same-sex marriage, they're not the export of uranium to India. They are the structural issues, and I think, you know, you've seen that with Kevin's speech, but you'll see that with a whole lot of other sort of moves and speeches and calls for action over the next week.
So why didn't Kevin Rudd tackle these issues when he was Prime Minister?
Yeah, look, it's a fair question. It's a fair criticism, I think. The reality is that there should have been reform a long time ago. It's overdue in the party. I have a feeling that we're not going to see a huge move forward now, although there is a lot of positive move forward. Particularly, ironically, New South Wales is kind of the state where they've, you know, you never take the medicine until you see the sort of disease, and we've seen it in New South Wales. So they're moving forward. I don't think you're going to see huge steps forward at this conference, but my prediction would be this will be the last Labor National Conference where major structural reform is not the single biggest and defining issue of the conference.
Now, this is the first conference since Julia Gillard became Prime Minister. Do you think Kevin Rudd's been sweating on this and waiting for it to speak about it like he did last weekend?
National Conference is the time to talk about structural reform. So, like, I mean, you know, there's no good time to bring this stuff up. That's the reality. And of course it was always going to bubble into everything these days in politics bubbles into leadership. So there was no time that was not going to happen. But my really strong view is the biggest risk for Labor at the moment is the status quo in terms of structural stuff. Forget about the kind of parliamentary party for a second, just talk about Labor as a party. If we maintain the status quo, we are in big trouble. There's no doubt about that in my book. And so I think this conference, I quite frankly wish I wish every single front bencher was out there making speeches like this. And that's kind of the state Labor needs to get itself into to push these changes through. And I don't think it'll happen this time, but I'm happy to make a prediction. The next national conference will be a much, much different affair, I would argue, and it has to be, because otherwise Labor will be in trouble.
Comments have caused some grumbling, though, among MPs. Some unnamed MPs are scoffing at Kevin Rudd's comments today, saying that he couldn't even be inclusive in his cabinet and his caucus. So why is he bringing up this issue of inclusiveness in the party? I mean, some would argue that's a pretty fair comment.
I think it is a I think Kevin, if he wants to make these arguments, has to answer that question. I mean, I can't answer them for him. I think it's a fair criticism. But it's kind of a not nearly as important issue as the bigger issue, which is our membership is collapsing. We have major problems in terms of representation and member engagement, and the reality is we have to solve that. So the grumbling should be, why aren't there more front benchers out there making these speeches and making these calls? And I would certainly, the calm water approach to politics has been a Labor rule for a long time, is never rock the boat. I actually think Labor needs to rock the boat at the moment. But I think Labor members need to do that. I think Labor frontbenchers need to do that, and I hope Julia does that as well.
It is being interpreted as a direct challenge to Julia Gillard's authority, though.
Look, party reform, there is never a time where someone can stand up and argue for party reform and it's not going to have some people grumbling. Because the reality is there's a whole lot of people in the party who want to see reform, and there's some people who basically have a vested interest in there not being reform, and they're always going to complain when that happens. Now, I'm not going to kind of defend either Kevin Rudd or Julia Gillard. That's not my job. All I would say is I think there's a whole lot of people in the party who really genuinely believe we need serious reform, and if there's and that you're never going to get that reform without some people saying, oh, the timing's not right, or not now, not now. We've been saying not now for a decade. It's enough of not nows. We need reform.
At this stage last year, you would have had an idea, or you would have been trying to formulate an idea of how you think the 2011 will go for the Kevin Rudd-Julia Gillard relationship and the Gillard government generally.
Yep.
Has it turned out anywhere near what you expected?
Look, it's been an interesting year in politics. I think it's been really fascinating. Both major parties have been their biggest enemies this year. I think the reality is that the problem that Abbott's got himself into now are caused by Tony Abbott and his strategy, and a lot of the problems that Labor got themselves into this year, they were fundamentally caused by Labor's weakness, but they were provoked by Abbott's kind of, he had a very, very disciplined year and he was impressed by that. But I think 2012 is going to be, I've called it's going to be a year of shenanigans. I have no doubt about that in terms of...
More so than this year?
Look, it's going to sound slightly illogical, but the Abbott v Gillard matchup is, to me, that has all the makings of a kind of warm-up game. I do not see it. It's not because I can see that both of them are going to go, or I know that there's going to be a leadership change, but I can't see both of them making it to the election. And the reason is because if there was to be sort of no movement, there's kind of either Julia will definitely be on top of Abbott, or Abbott will definitely be on top of Julia. Neither party is going to let that happen come election day. So I'd say 2012 is going to be a year of serious interest and movement, and it's not going to be a quiet summer holiday for anyone. Now, I would say at the moment, I think it's much more likely that Abbott is probably facing the pathway for Abbott to make the election. To me, is very difficult to see. The Liberal Party will always be in Abbott's debt. He did a very, very good job at destabilising Labor when we were vulnerable, and mostly for internal reasons. But I cannot see a pathway forward now where, with the mining tax coming in, the carbon tax coming in, and Abbott being in a very difficult position now, an almost impossible position, I think it's very difficult for him to make the election as leader. That's not saying he's kind of hopeless. It's kind of almost the opposite. He was so good at what he did, but his strategy has just run out of steam, basically, or it's gone past its use-by date. Now, he could rebuild himself over the summer, but in many senses, what's so good about Abbott is it doesn't allow him to do that, if you know what I mean. His strength, his discipline will also prevent him from massively repositioning and resetting.
You'd be missing politics and being right in the inner sanctum if you didn't have something else to occupy your time. Tell us about One Big Switch.
Yeah, look, One Big Switch is a really simple idea, and that is that we can use people power, effectively almost collective bargaining, to give customers power to demand cheaper prices on their bills. So we did the big bank switch, that was really successful, and now we're doing what we call the big electricity switch. At the moment we're in Victoria. If people go to onebigswitch.com.au, they can sign up, and what we do is we basically go to companies and say, we've got 50,000 people signed up. If you were to give us a discount, we'll promote that and try and get everyone to switch, basically. And at the moment, I think the deal in Victoria is 16% off your electricity and 16% off your gas. So, look, it's not that different to politics. It's people power can work. It's just, in the past, there's never really been a place for customers to do that. And so we just had a really simple idea was, let's take all the principles of campaigning and collective power and create a place where customers can do that, and that's what onebigswitch.com.au does.
Just less shenanigans?
Look, I don't miss politics. I don't miss waking up early, but I do miss the shenanigans, I have to admit that.
Well, you did have to wake up early for us today, and we appreciate that, Lachlan Harris.
Happy to be here.